Welcome to the Modern Mantra Podcast with Nick Sarafa and Elijah Johnston. Well, here we are, Amánda. It's great to have you on the podcast. And maybe let's just begin by tuning in a little bit. I feel like since we're setting up in our respective places and cameras moving and lights, maybe we just take a moment to ground together. And then we can get into this conversation. I'm excited to be here with you.
Likewise.
So, sweet. Cool. So just inviting you to get comfortable where you're seated. Beginning to tune into the breath, noticing the inhale and the exhale. Taking note of any sensations that you might be experiencing through your senses. And let's just take one breath together. We'll breathe in through our nose, try to bring it down into our navel point. Then we'll let it all out and arrive here into this podcast space. So let's breathe in together. And let's let it all go. Gently arriving. You in Lisbon, me in Asheville, North Carolina. And when you're feeling ready, you can open your eyes and we can come into this space together for this podcast, for this conversation, for this dialogue. I've been looking forward to this conversation since we had lunch together in Lisbon and just really getting a deeper understanding of what you're up to and what you're leaning into and what you care about and what motivates you and what you're building with Integra. And so I'm really glad that you're here. Thank you for the time. Thank you for the space. And thank you for being on here.
Thank you, Elijah. And thank you for this grounding too. It's really beautiful.
Of course. So I would love to just start at the point of what is integration and why is it important? Just get right into it to help to ground people in the context of what this means to you and why it's important.
So integration, I feel, is the root of this medicine, this seeking that we have right now at this stage. Many people are looking at altered states, all forms of altered states of consciousness, substance-induced and non-substance-induced. And integration is the capturing and synthesizing of these peak moments, these peak experiences, these insights, and translating them into actionable, real, meaningful changes that people can make in their life.
Beautiful. I love that. The translation of what's gained or what's gathered or what's received in these peak experiences into my everyday life, into my life. And what do you experience as being some of the biggest hurdles for individuals when they have these peak experiences and then go off into the world or continue with their life? What are some of those hurdles or barriers that maybe prevent people from honoring their integration and this translation?
So there are a couple of things. The first is that oftentimes people who work with these altered states, they're seeking the beautiful, joyful, magic, unifying moments, one with the universe, whatever that might be. And there are also the other side. There is the other side of that, which can be the really challenging experiences, the ones that we didn't think we would be looking at, but they're there. The memories or ideas that we long buried, things that can be actually quite traumatic. And so it's very easy when having these insights during a peak experience to just leave them there and just say, nope, I'm going to just keep them where it was during that container that I had. If I was working with a specific medicine, oh, maybe that's just a medicine that's not right for me, that's not working. And then that's it. And to leave it there in that ether, so to speak. And so what's the real challenge and where also the opportunity is to say no and not dismiss that and actually bring that back, bring that to your ordinary reality and start to make real changes from that point, from a grounded point of, okay, this happened to me, but it's time to actually look at that. It came up for a reason. So
Beautiful. And so, in my experience, having been in different medicine communities and different retreat centers and different places that facilitate and guide and move people through these peak experiences, I do notice that in some cases more than others, there seems to be a lack of emphasis on the integration, and more of the emphasis goes on the peak experience, as you call it. And I'm curious, in your experience working with these types of organizations that are holding these spaces, what are some of the obstacles for the organizations? Because we heard a little bit about the individual, but also curious, the organizations that are holding these spaces, what is preventing them from offering integration support in an effective way?
So for the organizations themselves, integration, the thing about integration is there's no one right way of doing. There's no one recipe that we can follow and magically everyone will have this very meaningful and sustained integration and transformation, right? So for the organizations that are actually providing or facilitating a medicine journey, how can they serve the individual needs of people while also, frankly, maintaining their own business? Integration is also over time. It takes weeks, months, maybe even years. And truly, that's really a barrier for a lot of these companies that want to provide the service. They want to offer some kind of integration, but in order to really have a sustained and meaningful practice, it's actually the responsibility of the person entering the space, the journeyer. And that's also an interesting shift that I'm trying to work with these companies on is, okay, so they're there for the first part, this transition phase, I like to call it, where after a ceremony, perhaps in a more, a more ritualistic context, for example, people sit in a circle and they're sharing their experience. This, for me, is a transition phase. And that organization or the retreat center, that's their responsibility to ensure a safe container for that transition, for people to, while still coming down from their peak experience, to feel held and safe and supported before they go home. But how can we now ensure prolonged integration and a thoughtful integration after the fact? And so the challenge really is to help not only the organization, but orient the end journeyer is the right balance. Who is it that's actually really taking on that responsibility?
Yeah, totally. And you mentioned this transition phase, and the thing that comes up for me is wondering if you have a sense or a mapping of what that integration journey looks like, or are there other phases? And if so, what are those phases? And where does the responsibility of the organization transition to the responsibility of the journeyer along that journey?
So I
Does that make
truly,
sense?
yeah,
Cool.
totally. And I see integration really as beginning before even we work with any kind of altered state. So integration starts in preparation. It starts with the intention. It's seated in that intention. That's already beginning in the process of integration because you're accepting that responsibility for what comes after, regardless of what that peak experience will provide. You're starting with that intention phase. And in preparation, of course, depending on the medicine or the experience, the facilitator or the retreat center, they probably have a list of protocols, whether it be practical, like dietary or lifestyle changes. If, for example, working with ayahuasca, you're abstaining from certain foods and practices. And then it's also the responsibility of the journeyer to set that preparation for themselves, create a practice that is almost reaching a peak experience. Perhaps they're meditating more deeply, or they're reflecting and journaling and preparing. And so that, of course, is a mix of both the journeyer and the organization. During the actual experience itself, there's elements of integration already woven in, um, from the music that's being played, the setting, the set, orienting everyone on those, those, yeah, those different aspects. And then, of course, transition, as I mentioned, this is very critical for the organization. It's really their way to shine and to really provide the space and the offering for a journeyer. And then this is where the transition really happens. And when people go back into their ordinary life, of course, it's really important for that facilitator or retreat center to offer their hand of support, whether it be a week later, a few weeks later, and there's perhaps a community aspect to it. You want to integrate with others who have been in that space with you, so you feel that you're not alone as you're transitioning back into your reality, perhaps very, very far away from where you were, with people who maybe you can't even share that experience with
Mm.
because it's not even a language they can even understand or come to know. So it is important that you maintain a thread still with the people that you were with the facilitator and their way of working through that medicine, not in the direct form, right? What is that thread of the medicine that still lingers for you? And then integration comes, and it's really everyone has a different form of integration. So there's phases, right? You're illuminating what it is that needs to be looked at during the
Mm.
experience itself. There's this illumination. And then you're transitioning. And perhaps that transition includes rest, a lot of not thinking about or feeling or integrating what actually happened, right? Just letting the body absorb whatever it was that happened, because there could be very much a very physical component to this. Giving ample space for that rest. I always include that as part of an integration program. The first day to do nothing. That's probably the hardest part of any
Mm.
integration, is to do nothing. And then once we're ready to look, we start to activate a little bit of what came through for us. What is it that we're uncovering? And that's that prolonged integration period, is this activation ultimately to a transformation. So what is it that is sticking with us through to the very end that we can actually change about our lives, about our habits, our relationships, the way that we see the world around us? So it's a very organic movement. And of course, integration can be a very short period for some. It can be very long, depending on the experience itself. But these are sort of the guideposts that I like to consider.
Totally. And that work is it can be quite challenging in my experience as a journeyer and as a space holder. And as a journeyer, I find that the more every single time that I sit, every single time that I have a peak experience with, whether it's my own endogenous breath medicine, whether it's an external plant medicine, I find that I get better at honoring my integration. And I've had experiences where I just didn't honor that. And what I found is that, wow, it was so easy to go back to business as usual, to have these really expansive peak experiences. And then it's like, well, I'm going back home. I'm going back to my life, going back to where I came from. And it was an easy pitfall for me to fall into, to just go back to the way things were. And what I found is that I felt in hindsight almost like it took away or robbed me from a lot of what I experienced. Uh, because what I experience in these peak states, it's like these are precious, life-changing, transformative experiences. And then once I go back to business as usual, it's like, well, where did all that magic go? Where did all of that go? And I've come to really understand integration as the medicine. Integration is the medicine, and that any medicine that we work with, it's only as effective as the integration, um, just from my own experience. And so, from your share, I would love to dive a bit into what you're working on and what Integra is, how it came about, and maybe we can start with what it is. What are you working on? How would you describe it?
Yeah, so firstly, I would say I completely resonate with all that you
Mm,
share about how incredibly easy it might be for us to just dismiss what just happened to us and go back to our lives, our normal reality. We have such an incredible window of opportunity, and it's small, but we can extend that with integration. And
mm,
so what Integra does is we create opportunities for transformation and healing. Real medicine, as you say, is in the journey that comes after the peak journey itself. And so Integra was designed to support people in that process and to help educate not only the providers who are of these peak experiences, because as you say, that may be an afterthought for the facilitator. It's not necessarily in their in their work. That's not what they're being trained to do. They're being trained to hold the space. They're being trained to facilitate that moment and anything that comes up. And the retreat center is dedicating so much time and love and energy into providing the framework for that. But what Integra does is we come in and we look at that existing framework, we see what's being provided, and we help make that transition possible for people so that they can continue to feel supported. They can continue to do that work. They can feel empowered to do that work, because truly it does take work. And one thing that these peak experiences, one thing that medicine really did for me personally is it opened the doors for me to take my own power back to my own healing process. And Integra is really based on this principle that you're the medicine, that you are the one that will be able to transform your life. And so Integra is building on that. It's building on what exists currently, where we need to go. It builds on
mm,
the people that are facilitating and devoting such time into this work. And it also builds on our unique characteristics as humans, on what we enjoy doing, what fuels us, what makes us excited to actually bring these peak experiences into our daily life.
mm. And do you work with the journeyers as well as the providers with Integra?
So Integra is focusing largely on the providers. I myself do sometimes work with journeyers in more of an integration coaching practice. What I'm finding where Integra does work with journeyers actually is ultimately we can provide something that the business or the organization thinks is useful. So the organization hosts a series of breath work and other journeys, for example, in meditation, and they do silent meditation and somatic experiencing. And they have this whole idea of what it is that they want their journeyers to experience later. However, we know that journeyers are so unique, and we're all humans. We all do things quite differently. And so Integra is in constant relationship with the journeyers
Got it.
through the lens, of course, of the organization.
Got it. And then how does your newsletter fit into the picture?
Hmm.
Who is that serving, and who are you writing to with that newsletter?
Yeah, Integra. Healing Beyond Medicine is the newsletter. That's serving everyone. It's the journeyer, rather, actually. It's us. It's my friends and loved ones and family and the people that I meet when I speak about this work. A lot of what I do is actually public speaking. I'm being asked by organizations to talk about why psychedelics, why altered states, what they actually mean for us. And people want to learn more. They want to try and understand. And maybe they're not even ready to do a ceremony or to have a peak experience, but they would like resources that they can look at and try to just have an understanding, a synthesis of where we're at with psychedelics, with integration. And so I write for them. It's often ideas that are coming from what's happening on the ground now, some changes in the industry, different conversations that I have, and I attempt to really weave that into the newsletter that I provide.
Beautiful. And I would love to get a sense of where this all started, because you strike me as someone, just in my knowing of you and getting to know you more by the year, you strike me as I've been tuning into this phrase called dharmic design, right? Dharmic designer. Dharma being like, what is our truest, innermost essence? What is our nature? And dharmic designer being someone who is designing from that essence, who's creating from that essence. And the work that you're doing feels like, just energetically feels very mission driven, and that you're walking in your path, you're walking in your purpose. And I am curious to know how you unraveled, how you uncovered this purpose and this path. Like, what are those personal experiences or journeys, or professional experiences or journeys, that led you to unearthing Integra and this whole world of work that you're doing with the integration of peak experiences?
Oh, thank you for that. It's really beautifully put, this dharmic
Mm,
purpose. And yeah, for me, well, this has been many, many years of unraveling, of weaving and unweaving and all this. Um, I came to this work personally. I was somebody who was suffering from a mental health perspective very deeply, from depression and anxiety. And I was a walking pharmacy of sorts, taking all kinds of pharmaceutical medications. And at the time, that's really what was offered to me. That's what I knew. That's what I thought would help me. And I was really just looking at symptoms at the end of the day. I was trying to put a Band-Aid over my feelings. And I was young, teenager, just trying to make it by and navigate the world. And I wasn't really I didn't even know about meditation practices or doing yoga or these sort of somatic releasing. This was still really, really early for me. And what changed was I met this amazing community of people that were doing things differently. They were looking at life more in a ceremonial way, as a festival, as a community. And they were doing practices like yoga, meditation, and dance, ecstatic dance, and also plant medicines. And here I am, quite young, meeting this amazing community that showed me this path. And that's when I did a plant medicine ceremony for the first time. And that was the first thing I'd ever really done. I wasn't somebody who came to the psychedelic space having tried LSD or mushrooms in a party setting. And I just wanted to go deeper and I wanted to
mm.
have a more spiritual connection. Actually, I was someone who was really suffering and was
Can I
looking.
ask which plant medicine?
Yes. So I was working with ayahuasca. That was the first experience that I've had with plant medicine.
Wow.
And it was in the United States with a Peruvian shaman, and in the context of community. So I was with people that I was getting to know and who I trusted. And for me, this was very new. I had heard about ayahuasca, had been to Peru before, but I hadn't done it there. I had been sort of seeking, but not sure what I was looking for. It was a very interesting experience to be presented with this opportunity to work with this medicine, and something inside of me said yes instantly without fully understanding what I was saying yes to. I really feel there was this intuitive part in me, or perhaps somewhere from another life, who knows, that said, okay, this is where my journey is going to really start. This is where this new phase of life begins. And so I worked with ayahuasca, and it didn't cure me. It didn't all of a sudden make all my depression go away. I wasn't waking up the next day ready to face the day and just, okay, everything is over, right? But what it does, and what I really like to share with people, is that it opens these doors. It's sort of a
Mm.
portal to a newer understanding of taking care of yourself, of really bringing that care to my own body, my own spirit. And it gave me this power. I said, wow, I can do this. I can take control again of my life and not put it in the hands of the psychiatric pharmaceutical system. And so that really started for me many years of personal work. And I put aside a bit this notion of working with plant medicine because at the time it was still very early. I couldn't really tell that many people. It wasn't something I was doing professionally, and rather it wasn't in the popular culture the way it is now. And so I continued to I went back to work in the startup space, and navigating through my life, this very powerful experience was still with me that I was integrating without even knowing about integration. I was integrating very profoundly. And there was something in the back of my mind that said, after many years, about 4 years, okay, let's look at this again. And
Mm.
that's when I decided to go back to university and to study neuroscience and psychology of mental health. And this was a general program of neuroscience, but I really wanted to look at what does academia and what does the research have to say about psychedelics. And
Mm.
so I did my master's in the effects of psilocybin together with psychotherapy. Rather, I did a review of the current research and where it is that we need to go and what's missing in the current research of these substances. And it was around that time that I met, when I finished this degree, rather, that I met the founders of a company that was making investments in the psychedelic sector.
Mm.
And so that's when I entered the business side of the industry. And I was able to get a bird's eye view of where it is that investments are being made, where are people paying attention to in psychedelics, what does the infrastructure look like for safe, accessible care from a clinical perspective? What are the drugs moving through clinical trials, particularly in the United States? And with this very big view of what's happening, I was seeing so many pitch decks, so many entrepreneurs coming through with these ideas, but nobody was talking about integration. And
Mm.
for me, that's been the most important part from the beginning. And so I said, okay, we're not talking about integration. This is clearly what's necessary. And that's when I decided to start this company called Integra, which is in service of facilitating integration for organizations and for retreat centers and for facilitators who are working in this realm. So that's
Beautiful.
a little bit of the journey.
Yeah. And what was your professional background before Integra? I know you mentioned that you moved after going back to university, you moved into the venture investment space. And I think that's when I met you while you were working in that investment role. But what was your background before that professionally? You said you were working for startups. Tell me a little bit about that because I really see this kind of personal path. And it seems like all of the skills and experiences you've gained in a professional workplace are kind of merging together into this venture that you've birthed. And so give me a sense of like what that professional background is.
Yeah. So my professional background has been a wide mix of incredible things, largely focused on community and building communities, on helping organizations to craft their message, storytelling. So I was working with some startups in product marketing and communications and strategy, largely in the deep tech space, 3D printing, fintech, and in areas that are fascinating. And it's funny because my experience has always been working in industries that are disrupting, that are trying to break the paradigm and to offer new solutions. And at the time, 3D printing was this, especially desktop 3D printing for consumers, it was changing the way people make art. It was changing dentistry. It was changing the jewelry business. And then in the fintech space, just using AI to solve anti-money laundering issues. And so I was entering these industries not knowing anything about them, but learning about them while working in the startup itself. But my role has always been around connecting people. It's always been around serving others and helping to really tell the story so that everyone within the organization and the organization itself, that their mission can be heard by the greater good.
Love that. And so now in this interweaving of these different aspects of you into this mission-driven organization, are you working with providers that are working with different medicine? Like, what does that look like? Are the integration programs that you're working on designing or the consultancy that you're doing, is it typically around a specific medicine? I know that you said your first journey was with ayahuasca, and then you went to school and were looking at psilocybin. But curious what that looks like now for you with the work with Integra. What are these peak experiences typically for people, and what medicines are they involving?
So the clients that I have work with a variety of medicines, both substance and non-substance.
Beautiful.
There is psilocybin. I have a psilocybin retreat center client, and also clients that are interested in working with these peak states, but are not obviously in a legal capacity to be administering them. They're sort of entering into that, but they're also working with journeyers who are not yet ready. So more very boutique, um, transformational journeys that involve relation with nature, breath work, somatic work. What Integra really, to answer your question around if Integra works with a specific medicine, I truly feel that integration is agnostic to a medicine. And regardless of the medicine that we work with, integration at its core, the basic principles are there and need to be in place for everyone. I've heard of so many stories of people that have worked with just a breathwork practice that's changed their lives far more than, let's say, a subsequent ayahuasca journey that they did. So it's really not necessarily dependent on the medicine itself, although there are some considerations, of course, relating to more plant-based medicines in terms of preparation, with diet and lifestyle changes that do need to be incorporated and considered. However, integration is for all. That's what I truly.
And what do you mean by non-substance medicines? Because I have a sense of what you're referring to, but just for the people who are listening, that might be a foreign concept, right? So what comes up for you when you name that non-substance medicine?
What comes up for me are not only, um, so what comes up for me are actually experiences that can be integration practices, but depending on the dosage or the setting, are in themselves um, medicines. So one of them, for example, is breathwork. You mentioned this. Depending on the level of the work, and I would love to hear also your story with this, you can reach a very, very peak state that fundamentally requires an integration after. Another would be a meditation, a transcendental meditation practice, especially if you go very deep and you're meditating for multiple hours. Vipassana, which is a silent meditation experience. Another type of medicine would be a somatic experience or bioenergetics, an ecstatic trance dance states. So moments where you're really pushing your body to the limit. Music can be just listening to certain kinds of music in a specific way can reach a peak experience.
Mm.
There's body work, energy healing, massage, a type of energetic massage. These are all medicines. They're meant for us to be reflecting, to look at ourselves differently.
Yes. And how do you define or understand medicine? What does that mean for you? Some people might think medicine and their mind goes to pharmaceuticals,
Yeah.
but What is medicine for you?
Hmm. Great question.
Mm,
Medicine for me is truth, actually.
mm.
Medicine is uncovering our truth. And maybe it's not a practical answer.
No, that makes total sense to me. That's powerful.
Yeah. The ways we uncover
Yeah.
our truth is our medicine. And there are so many different ways. And so
Mm.
I try, I work in the psychedelic space, but those are just tools to get us to truth at the end of the day.
I love that. There was the way that I've kind of understood medicine is a bit more vague, and I really like your definition more. For me, it was like that which heals, but I actually think how you see it really gets to the root of what the medicine is. That which uncovers truth. And these different medicines, whether it's plant medicine or some of our internal medicines, like working with the breath and those kinds of technologies, whether it's collective medicines, like sitting in a song circle, I think they're all different paths to the same door, all different paths to that door, to that gateway of truth. Uh, and the truth can be very revealing and very expansive, and there's deep work in how do we integrate this to get closer to our truth in our everyday lives? You know, so thank you for that definition. That was very well put. I know I kind of put you on the spot with that, but you tuned in to like that was powerful. Um,
Yeah.
and when it comes to these non-substance medicines, so the way that I've begun to understand it is really that we have these endogenous medicines that we can tap into, right? Whether it's using the breath or using just taking the yogic sciences, for example, any aspect of the yogic sciences. And then I also think that we have these collective medicines that also involve no
Mhm.
substances. Like I find that I was just in a song circle yesterday, and I go to song circle here every Wednesday. When I'm down in Costa Rica, I'm doing song circles like every day.
Wow.
And that in itself is like such deep medicine. Dance is medicine, movement is medicine. And so just really acknowledging that we have all of this medicine available to us. Um, and I hope that for the people listening, this expands the definition
Mm.
of the medicine that is available. And one of the things that has been really coming through my channel really strongly is how do we connect, like what's the bridge between medicine work and creativity? Because on my journeys, whether it's been with external substances or some of these non-substance medicine, I find that I'll often, or not often, but there are times when I'll receive very clear guidance on what to create or how to create, or times in which the medicine in which I'm receiving makes me want to just be in a mode of creation. And so, where I find my energy moving towards is what's the bridge between these states of truth, and when we reveal those truths and these different paths to that same door of truth, and creating from that place. How do we birth from that place? How do we like manifest from that place of truth? And I guess the to turn that into a question, I'm curious if you've come across in your work at all, and in these phases of the phases that the journey or goes through in their integration, are there any aspects of that involve or place intention or highlight creative practices, whether it's journaling or whether it's drawing, whether it's singing, or like what role do those creative practices play, if any? If it's something you've come across or something you work with, or something that even if you've worked with it yourself. as a journeyer.
I believe these creative practices you mentioned are incredibly important for any experiencing and journey work and integration as well. I, I feel that when we're entering a space of being in ceremony and being with medicine in a context of ceremony, whatever that could look like, it can be a small ritual with friends or even in a shamanic ceremony, we're entering a creative circle. The space itself is creation, and it's allowing us to connect with our life force energy, with the divine within us, which is a creative source. And so the more we allow ourselves to step into that, so that early stages of who we are, as even when we're born, I mean, we are beings of creation, we can weave that into applications of that creativity after. And so I do see many people who are working, especially with plant medicines, they're immediately drawn to mandala work, drawing in circles and drawing their experience as a way to make sense of what happened to them rather than trying to verbalize it. Oftentimes, in some shamanic traditions and some indigenous people say that we don't really share what it is exactly that happened to us, because the moment that we put it to words, the actual medicine disappears. And so what are other ways that
Wow.
we can, yeah. And it's an interesting one. And I've actually reframed a lot of my sharings from that perspective to keep the core of what actually happened actually with me. And to, if I decide to share it, it's in a creative space. It's through dance, it's through music, it's through drawing, it's through journaling poetry, or, creating that way without actually expressing the details of what came through. And I think some of us are doing that intuitively through this creative work that you mentioned. Yeah, so I definitely see a lot of that happening.
Yeah, I love what you just shared about the speaking and the naming,
Mm.
because I often find that a tool that is utilized for integration are sharing circles. I've been to a lot of different experiences, sat with different facilitators, and not all, but a lot have done sharing circles. Maybe the day after a peak experience or a couple days after the peak experience. And I find that in my own personal journeying, there are times when I'm like, I don't even want to try to put this into
Mhm.
words, because once I start to put it into words, I'm assigning form to something that for me was so formless. And I've kind of been on this, like, a bit of a fence of how I perceive and how I value sharing circles in integration, because I see it as a powerful tool. I just don't know if it's I feel like there's a lot of variables to it in terms of the timing after the experience. Uh, Maybe it's more valuable for some people than others, but I really like what you said there because it deeply resonated with my experience of, like, sitting in sharing circles and being the one that's like, I actually don't wanna I don't have a desire to want to try to put this into words. Uh,
Right.
and yeah,
I was
were
gonna
you gonna say
say, like,
something?
I'm so glad you bring this up, actually. This
Mhm.
is a fundamental part of at least what we do with Integra and in designing integration. It's what you say, how during a transition circle where we're sitting and sharing, that's not necessarily a requirement, nor is it something that should be encouraged for all people. Because, as you say, some people, and I've had this from my own experience, we just need to rest. We don't want to take in other people's stories as we're still trying to navigate our own story. And there's this also
Yeah.
performative aspect of it. You see people and they're highlighting only their most peak, incredible, wild experiences. And, even on a subconscious level, sometimes maybe we want to show the facilitator that we've done all this work and that we've experienced so much, rather than just, oh, well, some stuff came up, but nothing really major. We don't want to disappoint the group or the facilitator and ourselves. So we start to create more and more. And by the end of the sharing circle, we don't even know what's really ours and what's others and what actually happened and what didn't.
Yeah.
And I really feel that part of designing integration is to give permission to people to opt out, to step away. Maybe they want to stay and not share, or maybe they don't want to join the sharing circle. And that's not because they don't want to be part of the energy, or they don't want to, go to the very end of the ritual. It's because truly they're not in a position of wanting to experience that kind of sharing at that moment in time. So it's really, you bring that up, and I really resonate with that.
Yeah, I didn't even think about how sharing circles like how being in a sharing circle influences people's shares.
Mhm.
And when I really tune in and reflect on my experience, I'm like, yeah, that is true. Whether it's on a conscious or subconscious level. And then with such delicate experiences and delicate spaces, is that serving me? If like what I'm saying and what I'm sharing is like being influenced by everything else that people are sharing. Um, and also noticing, the that there can be a pressure to say certain things because everyone else is like,
Mhm.
I went through all the dimensions that ever existed and I saw God. And it's like, well, I didn't have that experience. And now I kind of feel bad saying that, So totally spot on. And what are some alternatives to this? I know you said opting out, but I guess what I'm getting at is what's your take on verbal expression as a tool for integration?
Verbal expression, you know, sharing can be very powerful and necessary and needed for many people. It depends on timing when that sharing happens. So my take on that transition phase, how people can opt out and do something else, can really be about setting up a space or a container for people to be out in nature and ground and just do nothing and just be, or having a reflection or journaling practice prepared, exercises prepared for them to work on, or drawing the mandala work, the really sitting with what happened and creating from it, or having a series of movement after light yoga or body work, or something that really more involves the body rather than the mind, I see as a more preferable transition option for people.
Hmm.
And then of course the sharing can come, but with these guidelines, perhaps suggesting to facilitators who are facilitating that sharing to say, to what level are you sharing? Is it the actual experience or how you feel about the experience or the feelings that are coming up right now? So there's different perhaps guidelines that can be applied so that people aren't necessarily digesting and revealing such intimate details, that keeps that element of it quite sacred and true to them. And so that kind of sharing is, I feel, a more appropriate for a transition.
Mm, thank you. And that got me thinking, what are your own integration practices? Like how do you honor your integration when you are in the seat of a journey or having a peak experience? What's your ideal integration journey?
So for me, I'm actually one of those who opts out usually of sharing during a transition circle. There are some exceptions, but I'm somebody who truly needs to take a lot of rest and time for myself to not think and to just be. And my personal integration, I am someone who likes to be able to know that if I want to refer back to an actual experience, that I can do so. So I typically just write a couple of notes of like the feelings, the insights really quick before I might lose, if any mantra or any sort of phrase comes up or any big theme, I quickly write it down and then I put it away. And I don't look at it for some time, actually. So my own integration is to go back into the body, to do a lot of somatic work, vocal activation, singing. I sit in my
Mm.
room in the morning and I'll just sing and meditate. So more use of the body. And then typically after a week or two or even 3, maybe not 3, 2 weeks, that's when I start to put to words the experience. Of course, this depends on
Mm.
if I was doing a big medicine journey or if it was some recreational gathering. But if I'm doing a deep work, I will actually wait some time before putting to words and reflection.
I love that. I love that. I've been on an integration journey currently. I spent the last 6 months in Costa Rica. And those first 3 months, I was there setting up our land, building some stuff, having some journeys as a journeyer. And then the last 3 months I was there, I was sitting in the context of being a space holder and being in service to the medicine and being in service to these spaces. And that's a whole different way of working
Mm.
with these medicines. And so I just got back to Asheville like 2 weeks ago from 6 months in Costa Rica,
Wow.
and I found it to be very turbulent so far. It's just like, "Oh my god, like, how do I e where do I even begin to like, bring all of this together to really integrate this into my everyday life?" And I think what you just shared is more permission for me to really just take my time.
Mm.
Hearing that you will sometimes wait 2 to 3 weeks to verbally share, I'm like, "Oh, cool, there's no rush."
Mhm.
There's no rush. Be gentle to myself, be kind, and, like, give myself the space. Um, and yeah, I would love to understand a bit more from an entrepreneurial perspective and working with and creating and birthing and operating Integra. What are some of the biggest challenges that you've faced on this journey in creating this and running this and operating this and working with clients? Like what have some of those challenges been?
Mm. For me, the challenge is the nature of this work is often blending personal and professional worlds. The lines are very blurred, at least for me. I've been working with altered states, with medicines, with personal development for so many years, and now actually working with this in a professional capacity, it's a moment to really integrate that with how I want to show up, and how the values behind Integra and how Integra works with organizations, chooses to work with organizations, the boundaries that we place. I think that's a really big one, is having the right boundaries set. Oftentimes we're working with these altered states. And for example, if we're doing missions and work and we're, Integra supports a retreat center that's facilitating a substance, do we take that substance? Do we enter in ceremony before having this relationship as a client? What are the rules around that? Is there any rule? Does it really, does it matter? There's all of this that's actually very subtle. It's a subtle part of the work. I could say that the challenge is, which this is a challenge. It's actually explaining to people the importance of integration and sharing them
Mm.
what they may not even know to be so important, right? As or critical. So there's the education aspect of it that takes time,
Right.
it takes patience. This is very new for many people. This whole world of entering these peak experiences, for many people in the global north, this is quite new. So integration is naturally something that will need some time. So there's that practicality, and of course, it's the subtlety as an entrepreneur working in this space, how to really balance and take care of myself in this process, how not to burn out, how not to just say yes to everything when knowing that the no is actually also a critical part of the intuition, right? So
Totally.
yeah, it's really this living the truth of integration in all ways is one of the biggest
Yes.
challenges.
Yes. I did not even think about that until you mentioned it, that integration is something that doesn't feel like a problem sometimes for people. Like it's I find it's a challenge, but it's not a challenge that many people, including myself in the past, are able to really put a finger on.
Mm.
Like why is this happening or what is happening? And uh, so what you're naming is that there's a certain degree of education that's required to actually get people to even be able to name or understand A, what they're experiencing, and B, the importance of it. And what are the ways that you're going about providing that education? I know you have this newsletter. Are there other ways that you're going about educating people on integration and what it is, why it's important, why care?
Yeah. So I have this newsletter. I'm actually writing a book on integration.
Yes.
Yes, I'm really excited about this. And the book is actually it's geared for millennials and younger. So Gen Z actually is a core audience because for exactly what you say, people don't actually even know when they're entering these spaces how important integration is. And I actually feel that uh, speaking to this next generation of truth seekers, this next generation of conscious healers, and people who are just wanting to have more from their life, that's who we should speak to. And there's so little information for this audience. And so integration, I feel, is where we can really lead the way with the younger generation. So there's a book coming, and largely, actually, I'm being asked to give a lot of talks for organizations that are not in the psychedelic space, but by people who are just entering this field of self development, and they want to bring those topics to their employees, and so they would love more information about this, but not in a way that's too scientific and also not too woo woo or spiritual, right? Something that really blends both. And I feel that we can approach that with integration and with talking about why it's important to make meaning out of transformational journeys, regardless of what those are.
Wow. So you're writing a book.
Yeah.
You're in the process of writing a book. And so one thing is you mentioned the next generation of truth seekers. And for me, where my mind went when you mentioned that was your definition of medicine as truth.
Hmm.
And if one is seeking truth, what does one do when they've experienced truth? What is that? And that's really the
Yeah.
integration. And so what's is the book more of a guide for integration? What's the intention of the book? Is it more a guide on maybe step by step? Is it more of your experience, autobiographical?
Mm.
What's the essence of the book?
So the book is less of a workbook style and more less of a step by step, precisely because integration can really vary across medicine, experience, personal characteristics. What I will do is really offer this sort of map of what integration can look like and in what contexts and how, and the philosophy behind integration, why it's important. Give a little bit of the history of the world of altered states, and really giving a context across culture, across medicine, healthcare,
Wow.
policy. So like people can have an understanding of where integration fits into each of these areas and be able to map it out for themselves. And it's kind of almost like a little manifesto. It's a little book of integration. That's how I call it. So we'll see what little actually means after all the information is being put in there. But it's essentially a message of how do we do this right? How do we do this with sustainability in mind, with reciprocity in mind? How do we do this in a really conscious way so that we're not contributing to any extractive activities in the process as well? So this is also part of the theme of the book.
Beautiful. And what else is in the works for you or for Integra at the moment?
So Integra is offering the moment. So we did a couple of workshops here in Sintra, in Portugal, where I
Wow.
live. So this is a experiential offering of what integration looks like in practice. We cover the theory of integration and then move through an altered state experience, non-substance induced, and then work through an integration around that altered state. That's Integra with a partner who's a clinical psychologist and somatic therapist. And we're preparing a retreat for providers of altered states experiences and providers of integration support. So therapists, coaches, facilitators of all sorts, uh, sort of a train the trainer of integration. So I feel that, we can have a lot of theory, we can have the book, and that's all really important. But the actual practical applications and exercises is where we're exploring in the fall.
Oh, that's beautiful. So is this going to look like a multi-day retreat style of training?
Yes, it'll be a couple of
Wow.
days, very intimate to start. And we really want this to be sort of a training ground also for other therapists to meet one another, to exchange ideas. I really feel that this whole industry that's in service of helping people heal, we're all stronger together, we work better together and in collaboration. And so it's kind of like a way of bringing everyone's expertise and insights in one place.
I love that. In my experience, some of the retreat centers I've been to or places that do provide peak experiences are immersed in nature.
Mhm.
And what that's typically meant is that you don't have the density of people that a city like Lisbon may have or a city like New York may have, just in terms of meeting people out and about that might have the same profession as you or might have the same interest as you. And so I think that's such powerful work, even in just bringing people together to learn from one another, the providers and the facilitators. And I'm also interested because we're going to be facilitating retreats for the first time
Wow,
next year.
amazing.
And throughout my work with medicine and throughout my studies and apprenticing, the more that I walk on this path, the more I understand how big of a responsibility it is, to guide people through these peak experiences. And I feel like before before stepping into that, having some understanding of how other space holders approach this and being able to learn from people that have looked at this from a lot of different angles is so valuable. So thank you for offering that. That's awesome. So you're doing these in-person experiences right now. You have these day experiences that are combining these, I would say, non-substance medicines with some integration work. And then in the fall, you're going to be expanding into these multi-day retreats. And you're also writing this book. And are you still providing services to providers in terms of consultancy and program design? Is that something that's still active for you?
Yes, absolutely. And also, one thing that I'm seeing with clients is this need to design for online integration, integration circles. So, community, bringing people together regardless of the experience. So, people who are coming in from various different levels of journeying and they need a space to connect and to integrate, but to do that among community, not just one on one therapeutic support. And so, that's also been a really interesting use case of integration that has more of a community aspect to it.
Yeah. I want to double click on that real quick in terms of online integration. So what I've seen in the past are, "Well, let's all get into a WhatsApp group and let's stay in touch."
Yeah.
But I'm curious, what modalities of online integration are you experimenting with or leaning into or advising clients to work with? Like how is digital technology playing a role in what integration can be?
I'm a big believer in technology supporting us to get off technology, of course. Um,
Yes, me too.
I want us to spend more time in nature and less time on our phones. So if we're going to use technology, we need to use it most effectively and in a way that's really in service of the overall like goal or outcome that we want to have. And so, yes, having a WhatsApp group where people are just chatting and it ends up being an archived group and it ends up with all the other 50 that you never see again is not really the goal. um, we want these to be containers of active, intentional integration work. And so it's not necessarily having an ongoing community to be with, but a community that we show up, we be present for in an online space that has a structure uh, and that's consistent over time. So if you know that you want to have an integration session, you know that it's going to follow a very similar protocol online and that you can come to it regardless of your experience. New people might be in that circle. You might have the same group. So it's almost like a kind of like a 12-step program, but with integration and virtual. So one thing that we know about addiction recovery through 12-step is this consistency of structure and that it enables anyone to be a facilitator uh, of that experience wherever you are in the world. And so how can we replicate that for an integration practice online and really make that intention to show up? It's not something that continues later. So it's a little bit of what Integra works with.
Lovely. Lovely. There are two more places I would love to explore with you. One is, I'll start with the first one. So, for the people that are listening to this podcast, I would just love to tune into maybe some advice that you would share. Insight, advice, mantra could be something, just whatever is coming up for you. And I would love to explore it from three angles. One is the angle of the provider, one is the angle of the journeyer, and one's the angle of an entrepreneur
Mm.
that is looking to build their venture and walk in their mission. And so maybe we start with the provider, and there's no rush. You can tune into it, you can feel what comes through. But if there's one big piece of advice that you can give
Mm.
to providers of spaces and sacred spaces and healing spaces and peak experiences, what would that be?
What comes up for me for providers is to deepen the practice of listening. I know that might seem like a little obtuse or ambiguous, but listening is something that, at least what from my experience, having worked with some indigenous communities in the Amazon, is a very sacred practice that is done regardless of working with medicine or not. But attunement, uh, real attunement to the space itself, to those individuals that are entering that space. They're coming from very different walks of life. And perhaps they're doing something very new to them for the very first time. And it takes a lot of courage to be entering that space and to deepen that practice of listening so that there's no ego in any kind of provider relationship. That goes for obviously a facilitator, but the container provider as well, the retreat center. Uh,
Right.
yeah,
I love that. And what about the journeyer?
for the journeyer.
And just want to frame and set the context that peak experience can be from non-substance medicines as well as substance medicines, but this is a peak experience and we're looking to translate it into our everyday lives. And so what's that advice for the journeyer?
So for the journeyer, I would suggest to, before even entering this peak experience, to, whether if it's particularly substance induced, to have a real thoughtful understanding of your own practice with the unknown, with fear, your relationship with what that means, what that comes up for you. What does letting go truly mean? Because you're going to be confronted with that concept from the very beginning of any peak experience, all the way through past integration. Fear, unknown, the inability to see what will come next. All of these concepts are going to become reality. And so my advice is more just to be aware of this that may arise, and to start working with that before even entering any peak experience state, in whatever practice that means for you. So if that means cultivating more self-awareness of breath, of deep listening, of meditating, of journaling, start working with that before you enter a peak state, because it's only going to strengthen your integration later.
Beautiful.
Anyway.
And for the entrepreneur, from someone who has been on the venture investment side as well as the entrepreneur side, just tuning into what advice would you give to a mission-driven founder looking to birth their dharmic creation?
So for me, this concept of reciprocity is really important. And I feel that in organizations, especially those who are in the wellness space and the psychedelic space, incorporating this element of reciprocity from the beginning, when you're designing what it is that you want to create and serve in the world, whether it's a technology or a physical service or product, how is it that reciprocity can be embedded? This concept of what it is that I give and take, this harmony, balance between yourself, others, the natural world, this element of, by entering this journey or this business, what is it that I'm offering others first and foremost? I really feel that weaving that philosophy early on will profoundly affect how an organization functions and thrives.
Love that. Thank you for those words of wisdom. And the second space that I wanted to explore is more of the space of closing this container together. And yeah, how can people support what you're doing currently? Where can people find you? What kind of support are you looking for? And that could be the experiences that you're providing, the offerings that you've created, as well as if there's any internal support that you may need or collaborators that you're looking for on this journey.
So people can support by keeping that curiosity for learning about integration and looking to meet with the people that are in full service of integration and explore that. So for Integra, if you're curious and interested in deepening your integration practice by coming into contact with us, attending retreats or workshops, if you're a retreat center or an organization that works with altered states, or you're just wanting to incorporate this integration philosophy as a company, maybe not even working in a psychedelic practice, you can certainly contact us, contact me. We can talk about how to weave that in. And collaborators, I'm always looking to connect with people that are in full service of integration in all the different modalities, plant-based, not plant-based, substances, non-substances, people who are looking to broaden the understanding of what it means to actually be in a transformational container. Anyone who resonates with what we've talked about today, would love to be in touch.
Beautiful. Yeah, because it also seems like you're partnering up with different practitioners, like for these
Mhm.
workshops that you're doing. So beautiful. And where can people find you? Where like how can people find what you're doing? Where should they go if they want to get in touch, if they want to learn more?
Yeah, people can come to my website, which I can send to you, or Instagram, LinkedIn. I'm on all these socials. Uh, that's probably the best way to reach me. I'm also in Lisbon in Portugal at the moment. So if you're interested in any workshops, I often post about those on my social. If you want to sign up for my newsletter, that as well.
Beautiful. And we will put all of this in the show notes. So if you're listening and want to get involved or want to reach out, you can go to the show notes and all of this will be available. And with that, I would love to thank you.
Mm.
Firstly, thank you for your time and your presence and creating the space to come on this podcast with us and to have this drop in with me. And secondly, a big thank you for your service, for walking this path and for what you're leaning into and what you're providing and your courage to be able to take these experiences that you've accumulated in other places and take these transformative life experiences as a journeyer and walk in your mission boldly and courageously and gracefully. So, thank you for your service. Thank you for your time. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you, Elijah. And thank you for your trust.